Now I will introduce Doug Madory. He's from Oracle, and he will give the presentation. Doug, now to you.
Let me, Bert is still sharing his screen, so he'll have to stop. Oh, there we go. Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, can you guys see that? That's good. Okay, my name is Doug Madory, and this is a talk entitled Excessive BGP AS Path Prepending as a Self-Inflicted Vulnerability. So this is something I've been looking at the last year or a year and a half, and let's talk about what's the impact of prepending. So just to define terms here, when I say AS path prepending, what I'm referring to is a traffic engineering technique used to deprioritize a route by artificially increasing the AS path length. And so when the prepending term comes from a repeated ASN in the AS path portion of a BGP announcement, typically to a subset of adjacent ASs. And assuming,
if I may interrupt you, can you put your slides
in
slideshow mode, please?
Oh, okay, sure.
Thank you.
I see. I've got two screens. This is it's confusing. Let's see. All right, if I get rid of the other screen,
You can make
how about that?
Full screen.
That should be better, right? Great. Thanks for the tip. Yeah, I had a second screen. It was projecting on. Okay, so path prepending. Assuming all their criteria are equal, the BGP route selection process is going to prefer the shortest AS path length, i.e. the non-prepended route. So that's what prepending is. And prepending itself typically is not the source of a lot of problems. There's one notable exception, and that is an outage that occurred in 2009. It was actually kind of interesting and worth mentioning. So in February 2009, there were internet-wide outages caused by a single errant routing announcement. And in this case, you had an AS announce a prefix with an extremely long AS path. And this came from a difference in the command line configuration between MikroTik and Cisco. And so in one case, in the Cisco configuration, you would specify what AS you would like to appear prepended to your AS, and in the MikroTik, that same field referred to how many times you would like it to be prepended. And so when this AS 47868 put their own AS to the left of there to be prepended, it was telling that would have been fine for a Cisco router, but for MikroTik that meant you were asking the router to prepend 47,000 times. Thankfully, this value is stored as a 8-bit integer, and so it flipped over many times and eventually ended up creating only 552 prepends, which is still a lot. That alone didn't cause the problem. Then we had announcements in circulation of prepends of 552, but as those routes traversed the internet and got another AS would get added, another AS would get added until it triggered an unknown to that at that time error in the Cisco iOS that would crash a router if it received a announcement with prepends more than 255. 255 ASNs in length. So that's an interesting incident from over 10 years ago that a bunch of people wrote up. If you've been around for a while, maybe you're familiar with this. But prepending also shows up a lot in routing leaks. And so I do a lot of analysis of routing leaks. I have done for the last 10 years, and it is always a footnote or a subplot to a routing leak where some of the most affected routes were affected because of the fact that they were prepended to essentially the entire internet. So I first learned about this doing the analysis of the China Telecom leak back in 2010. When I looked at the top, I typically would look at what are the most impacted prefixes in this routing leak. What got whacked the most? And in this case, if we looked at propagation of how much a leaked route propagated across the internet, we'd see in this case 2 of the top 5 prefixes were actually U.S. prefixes. The vast majority of the impact of this incident stayed within China. So in the U.S. national security circles, they look at this as some sort of an attack. I don't think people familiar with this in the space agree with that assessment. I don't. But it was interesting at the outset to see that 2 of the top 5 most propagated leaked routes were U.S. routes. And when you looked into why it was the case that these were leaked, it turned out that these were prefixes that are prepended several times to a single upstream. And in this case, you can see this is the AS path. Here, these are the 2, /21 and /22. And this is the AS path. So this, the origin was 12163, prepended 5 times. And then there was only a single upstream, 7795. And then on top of that, they only got GTT 3257 as an upstream. So the result was that by extending their AS path length and offering no other alternative than when an origin leak occurred, most of the internet believed the origin leak over the legitimate leak, the legitimate announcement. So we brainstormed on what we ought to refer to this particular phenomenon, because there's, I'll use the word excessive here, but excessive can be in multiple different dimensions. You could have a very long AS path length that looks crazy, but I'm not so much interested in the length, but the fact that it's announced to the entire internet. So, to a single upstream. That phenomenon in this presentation we've termed prepending-to-all. And if you were to go back and look at some of our other autopsies of routing leaks, we typically do call this, I would call out the prefixes that were impacted the most. And then we, in each one, we're calling out prefixes and saying why it is the case, and they're, again, prepended to all, prepended to a single upstream more often than not. And so then that amplifies the impact of the routing leak. This is another one from the Telecom Malaysia leak in 2015. All right, so prepended to everyone. These prefixes are seen, so this is the data I'm using this is the old Renesys data. This is, we have about 350 IPv4 full tables that we're looking at. So this isn't just one company, this is many vantage points. And so when I look at from all these vantage points, they're all seeing this as prepended. That's an issue, because in that case, the prepending is no longer shaping route propagation, which is what would be the legitimate use of prepending. And it's just simply incentivizing another AS to choose another origin if one does suddenly appear by mistake, like in the case of a leak, or otherwise if there was some sort of an attack. So I've known about this phenomenon back to 2010. I really didn't know until last year quite how much how common this was. And so we ran across, went and looked at across the global routing tables for V4 and V6 to find that there's actually a lot of this that goes on, and it's hard to explain. So if we look at this table on the right, we're looking at is the The y-axis is how many of our BGP sources see a particular prefix through a prepended path. And along the x-axis, we sorted the global routing table in a descending order from high percentage to low percentage. So at the left-hand side of this chart, we're seeing prefixes that are prepended to basically everything on the internet. And there's a sizable portion of the internet, the global routing table, that is that. In fact, depending on what, obviously it's a curve, so you have to pick a line that you'll cut off here. But if we said the cutoff was 95%, if it's prepended to 95% of our sources, there's over 60,000 routes that are like that, which is about 8% of the global routing table. 1 out of every 12 routes in the global routing table is prepended to basically the whole internet. As you flip through, who's doing this is entities of all stripe, government, banks, internet infrastructure. Lots of people do this. If you lower it down to 50%, then we're at 50% of our BGP sources see a prepended path to get to the prefix. Then we're up to 13% of the global routing table sees it that way. Diagram, this is for a month or two ago, just ran where most of these, the top 10 sources of prepends by counts. This fluctuates month to month or day to day, but those are the top. So I did something similar for the IPv4 for India, and we can see that by this metric, we see about 16% of Indian IPv4 prefixes are prepended to all. That's double the rate of 8% in the global routing table. And if we look at the top 5 ASNs doing prepending to all, here they are in descending order by prefix count. The top 1, 4, 5, 5 to 8, about 80% of the prefixes that are transited by this prefix, by this AS, are prepended to everything. And actually, this AS 10201 announces 100% of its transited v4 prefixes prepended multiple times to a single upstream, like this at the bottom of the slide. There are a few exceptions where this is prepended sometimes 5 times, but about more than 95% of the time it is prepended 7 times to a single upstream. Basically just, asking someone on the internet to choose another origin if one were to appear. V6 is a slightly lower number, and I think that's probably the case. The explanation may be just that there's just less traffic engineering going on in V6, or at least there's been less time to accumulate the cruft of traffic engineering. So the numbers are lower, where it was 8% in V4, it's 5.6% in V6. Again, here are some sources of the V6 prepends. I'll post these slides up if someone wants to go and look at check my math on these prefixes. Again, if we look at, this is V6, the title is wrong, but this should be V6 prefixes. We see about 7.3% of Indian V6 prefixes prepended to all. That's 30% higher than the global rate.
Madory,
and here are,
if I can interrupt,
yeah.
please finish your presentation.
Okay, okay. So let's see. Yeah, current longest is this one with 10 or more prepends. And let's see. So what's the risk? So this is an actual example here. If you have the /24 is prepended many, many times to a single upstream. If an attacker wanted to intercept some of its traffic, they could announce, they could forge a path. We know this happens. They forge the AS path, announces somewhere where they don't mind announcing forged paths. These places exist, and maybe announce just a couple of ask the origin, maybe even throw in a prepend so it looks legit. Upstream, a couple of upstreams. This would grab a portion of the traffic because this route would propagate to a certain portion of the internet due to the fact that the legitimate route is so very long. Illegitimate route would be seen as very attractive to a number of ASs. let's see, we'll keep moving. When we look at this longitudinally, we can see that this is growing as a proportion of the routing table. So the routing table is growing, but the amount that is prepended to the entire internet is growing faster. That's true in both V4 and V6. And V4 is growing at a faster rate. And that may be, again, someone sets up the prepending, they never take it down. They never remove it. So, why does this happen? We went and talked to a bunch of entities that do this prepending, asked them why they do it. They can explain what's the purpose. We knew one of my colleagues knew one of the MEDOX guys for the Burning Man Festival, this countercultural festival in the western part of the United States. We asked them why they were prepending. They looked at it and said, "Oh, that's incorrect, so we should fix it." We took it to Cloudflare and Google. They also, to their credit, removed these as we reported them to them. So they have the similar responsiveness to the Burning Man Festival. But a lot of people just said it's an operational issue and didn't want to get into it. And these conditions remain. So wrapping up here, the causes we were able to ascertain from these discussions was that there's just some poor housekeeping. AS maybe has two transit providers that prepend to one. The non-prepended transit provider goes away, and now they're stuck with the prepended one, and they never take the time to remove it. There's also the case that people do a lot of tricks to do return path influence. And in this case, they're prepending to the entire internet to try to force settlement-free peers to send traffic over their peering links, which is a very heavy-handed technique. You've kind of poisoned yourself with the internet using this technique.
Madory, this
and then, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just, I want to ask a very small question.
Yeah.
Mr. Josh has raised this question. An ISP has the AS number control employed in there. Any chance for an attacker to direct the traffic them by prepending the AS?
Can an attacker? Well, I went through a scenario of how an attacker could take advantage of a prepended route. So if you had one that was heavily prepended, you'd be leaving a lot of room for an attacker to forge a plausible path, plausible AS path that would take a lot. It'd be very hard to detect, certainly with off-the-shelf techniques. The tools that do routing alarms right now look for an unauthorized origin or unauthorized upstream, but it's not going to look, you can't analyze the entire AS path because there's so many possible legitimate things that could happen. So I believe, I tried to look for a real one, but it's very hard to even to figure out how to find a real case. So far it just exists as a plausible, or as a theoretical scenario that someone could use this to intercept traffic.
Thank you very much, Madory.